It's a Justin Palmer show. Here we go. Woo! Woo!
Mr. AJ, welcome back after that nice little break.
What's up, my man? Yeah, we had a few days in Seattle, which will be our next destination after our evacuation from California.
That's official.
That's official. And now we went up, met with a realtor to look at some houses, which is really the worst time to be buying a house. And kind of made that decision. You know, I think we made the decision to leave, but now we made the decision to go to Seattle and started taking some of the steps around, hey, we got to find somebody who can find a house, get some financing in order, blah, blah, blah. Maybe even an offer mode in the next couple of months.
Yeah.
To what is undoubtedly the most, the fastest growing and highest priced sellers market in Seattle's history.
Wow.
A 12% on-year growth for the Seattle market in the past 3 years. I mean, people who bought houses that were 5 years ago at 500 are selling them for $1 million. And I mean, I've only seen a couple of times where something like this happened, and it doesn't look like this is some fluke. It looks like this is the way it's going to be, because you know, Amazon, Microsoft, Boeing, these places kind of made this market. So we got a challenge ahead of us, needless to say, about finding something that we can get into that's affordable and in a good school and all of that junk. Mm-hmm. So, but that's what we were doing up in Seattle for almost, a full week.
That's awesome. Dude, Seattle is like, I mean, I'm from that area originally. And as much as I would not want to live in the Northwest again, at least for right now, it's a fucking incredible place to grow up, man. It's such a beautiful place. It's like the hype around rain is totally overblown, and the summers there are just beautiful. You can be outdoors in different you can go to the sound, you can hit the mountains, you can ski, you can go, if you cross the mountains in the summertime, it's hot as fuck. Like you can be in like a completely, and it's all beautiful. Plus there's no taxes. I love it.
Yeah. And that was a surprising part, that Seattle is right at the national average for annual rainfall. So the fact that everybody talks about how bad the weather is in Seattle, I don't know what people are saying. I think
it was
it's
to keep
right,
Californians out.
It's about 38. It's about 38 inches per year. It's the national average, and Seattle is right there in the middle. So, I don't think it's all that bad. I think maybe some people are kind of talking about how, okay, it doesn't have to rain for it to be a cloudy day, and you just don't get that many sunny days. Maybe that's what they're talking about. But to your point, it's like an hour or two to get over the mountains, and on the other side, it is, like you're on the other side of the mountains. It's like Vegas. It's hot, like well over 100 degrees day after day after day in the summer. And I think that if you need that, you can easily do that. And that might be another part of our plan, is to actually get some actual land on that side. So if we do need to escape the city, that we can drive out there. Land is still cheap out there, and there's tons cheap of it in Washington State.
Yeah,
that are 2, 3, 4 hours away from Seattle. Go out there, spend a few days. If we really need to, I think we can put that plan together. Since we want to be conservative, because even though we have the house, I don't know how much we want to be like stuck in the house or be doing that whole thing. We're still going to be traveling, driving around, trailers and vans and different places. So I think that we're going to be really, really kind of small and compact house in the city, just to have access to schools and a gym and a grocery store and all that other stuff you need, and then that be like home base for when we kind of boomerang out.
That's awesome, man. You know what's interesting about that is, over the last few weeks, I've been working with my uncle to work on the logistics of building this overland expedition truck. Turns out
how's that going?
We're doing it in Washington State. He's got a trail job next August, and he's going to have a bunch of resources up there. So we're going to be building this thing in the Pac Northwest. The box company that I'm 90% sure I'm using for the shell is based in Vancouver, Canada. So we're going to be building that. And
you're going with you're going with the Ford commercial vehicle, or you're going with the Isuzu?
Isuzu. Yeah. Okay. That's the one. It's super because Uncle Matt is a master mechanic. We're just going to buy the chassis and cab basically, and then redo everything. Right.
Yeah. Yep. That's the good way to do it. And if you have the plan about how to put it together and some of the basic skills, I think it's something that's fairly straightforward. Yeah. As getting a box, and those Isuzus are solid. Yeah. Trucks. Yeah. Well, they're
now that I picked it after going through a couple different vehicles, I'm like, I see these things everywhere.
Yeah.
They're everywhere.
Like in college, in the sports car scene, we used to have these like tiny little sports cars that we try to make faster back like in the Fast and the Furious days before the first movie came out. And those Isuzus are little turbocharged engines. And we used to like scour junkyards and eBay for parts from that thing and make homegrown turbocharger kits for our cars, because there's some actually reasonably high quality parts that go into that Isuzu motor. That I know a friend of mine who's building a Nissan 240 SX. He turbocharged it and used an intercooler from the Isuzu NPR that happened to fit perfectly right behind the radiator. Wow. So I know it's a solid truck and worldwide recognized as a great cargo hauler.
Yeah. Well, and I think that was the number one factor, as you and I talked about, was the ability to get parts in remote areas, to the extent when things go wrong mechanically. I want that ability to get quick fixes so it doesn't completely derail our plans for 2 weeks or something.
Yeah. And you want to be able to go at a highway speed, like some of these school buses can barely do 50 miles an hour.
Oh yeah.
You want to be able to, so like uphill, you don't want it to really struggle going uphill. You need to be able to have enough power to do that. And then get decent mileage, like, at least north of 12, if not closer to 15, 17 miles per gallon, because, you get a big 30 footer, 32 footer, 35 footer, and you're just, the amount of fuel that thing takes to keep on the road, it's just prohibitive. So if you want to go somewhere, you don't want to ever think, oh, we can't go there because I need to put a tank of gas in my car. That's, that kind of defeats the whole purpose.
Right.
And sure, it's overlanding, but at some point you get into the okay, well, we could have just flown here, and right. there's some of those trucks are that expensive to run and to maintain, where you could just fly and stay in a hotel instead.
For sure.
But and then to be able to do it, and I think that's why the Mercedes products are so popular right now, is their running costs are super low. They never break. They're dead reliable. They get like 20 miles per gallon on the highway. They can virtually go anywhere, uphill, downhill, off-road, the whole thing. Super aerodynamic. They're quiet inside. You don't have to deal with like weather and rain and shit like that. It can be pouring rain outside. You don't get any water inside because it's a single cab. And so I think that those things are really popular. That's why they're bringing that much money. But I think it can all be designed into a vehicle if you build it that way. But I think it's hard, without considering all of that stuff, to build it on your own, unless you really get somebody who's got a good mechanical sense coming into the project.
Totally.
And it sounds like your uncle's got that stuff, because it's hard to think about, okay, well, what's the wind noise going to be in here? Like, you know what I mean?
Yeah. Or like torsion, right? The torsion on, you need like the subframe for a box, because it's a separate structural component of the truck. When you're going even semi off road, you can twist the box and crack it easily.
Totally. And I didn't tell you this, but my truck arrived 2 days ago.
Boom.
My 1972. I built a 1972 Chevrolet short bed C10. And it has a 5.3 liter iron block with twin Precision 67 turbochargers. And the car is making, on pumped gas north of 700 horsepower. And it is not a boxed in frame. So when you stand on the torque from the motor and, and the entire frame will kind of twist because you get that torque into the motor mounts, and just where the motor is mounted and where the drivetrain is mounted will twist the frame. So right now I've got some cross bracing in there to keep it flat. But I think that if we turn up the boost, which the car's boost, I mean, we can run 26, 27 pounds and make 1,000 horsepower in that truck. Damn. And if I were to do that, even this frame, I think would get twisted up. But yeah, I mean, it's a big consideration, especially if you're thinking about articulating it in some kind of off-road situation, and you have a bunch of weight, coming into the chassis, and you can kind of twist things up that way.
Yeah. No, I'm still considering outsourcing the subframe just from that standpoint, right? I mean, I need to talk to my uncle a little bit more. I think he's probably pretty comfortable with it. He's built crawlers and all sorts of stuff from scratch.
Yeah, if you box in the frame, you should be okay.
Yeah. So
yeah, because the frame rails on the bottom are usually like these C rails, and boxing it in means that you just take another piece of metal and you weld it into that side. So now the actual frame rail is completely box tube. And then that creates, because if it's just a C thing like this, you can twist it like that. Mm-hmm. But when it's boxed in, it creates a lot more twist rigidity. So that's kind of the hot rod approach, is boxing in those frames, and that usually keeps it a lot tighter, Yeah. And it allows the suspension to do more work, which is what you want. You want like the suspension to really do the job of translating the road into the car. That way it's not like your frame is not putting all of that stuff into your body. Totally. The suspension is doing all the work.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, my whole philosophy behind it is like, I want the ability to go everywhere. I don't want to be limited by the design of the truck, and therefore it's worth spending the time and it's not even really that much money to upgrade suspension and upgrade the frame, right? It's not a lot of dollars. It's just being conscious of it.
Did you find a truck already?
Not yet. I'm not going to focus on buying one. They're readily available in Arizona because a lot of landscapers use them. And my uncle actually, he lives in Arizona. He just happens to be, he owns land in Eastern Washington, which is where he spent a majority of his life. And he now lives in Arizona. And so we're going to pick up a truck in Arizona, drive it up, and start the work up in Washington.
Yeah. Nice. Yeah. Sounds like an interesting project, and maybe we'll get a place next door.
Oh, yeah. Well, I look at this as I'll probably be the first one to go. My uncle wants to build one as well. And so I was like, look, let's get all the wrinkles out, doing kind of my use of it is going to be probably the most intense from a human perspective. So getting the gray water and black water system, getting the battery system, extra fuel. I want the ability to basically cross the country without filling up if I can, with extra fuel tanks.
And what's interesting is Anissa is almost 5. And when I'm building anything, there's 3 or 4 things that we're kind of working on constantly around here at the house. We obviously have the products that we make for our business. And then, now we've got the truck, and she's familiar with the truck. And there's a couple of other household things. She is massively interested in either watching or being a part of some of those basic tools like hammering and screwdriving. And I think we've got some STEM toys for her where she does that stuff. You seeing that with Max and your gang over there that's like taking a huge interest in wanting to be mechanically inclined? For some reason, I think kids just gravitate towards that stuff because, I don't know if it's like there's some natural reward that's built into fixing something, or if there's if kids just like see us taking interest in it and they want to do it because of that, or she just seems like super into it when we're either fixing the bicycles or working on our own stuff. She just likes to be a part of it.
Total, dude, 100%. My inner tube on my I have a fat bike out here that I ride with the baby.
Yeah.
I have the seat that snaps onto the front. The I can't remember what it's called. You have the same one, right?
I have the same one. Yeah, where they're riding shotgun.
Yeah, it's like iBaby or something. I don't know, some weird name. But my tire blew out while I was riding with the baby, and so Anna's like, "Oh, just take it to the bike store." I was like, "Why would I fucking do that? We have a little kids pool." I was like, "When the kids get home from school, I'm gonna remove the inner tube. I'm gonna show them how to check it to see." And she was like, "Anna only knows New York, Justin, right?" But this is how I grew up. It was like
That's
my
how you
dad
check
wasn't
for
around,
leaks.
but my neighbor's dad, like, he would do all this stuff with us. We would check for the leak and identify it. It was a split on the seam, so I'm like, okay, I can't patch this thing. I took them to the bike store. We bought the inner tube for $12, and we came back and they helped me install the inner tube and reseal the tire. And that process alone is so valuable for them to see, especially coming from a big city, just to see, hey, you can do these things on your own. And the funny thing that you brought up is that we're planning a fort right now. I just took him to Home Depot yesterday after school, and I got a few, just all you need is a 7¼ inch circular saw, some wood screws, and a drill, right? Plus like some 2x4s to build a fort. And so we're building.
Yeah, I mean, you don't need much.
You don't need
What's
anything.
the fort gonna? Where's it gonna be?
Well,
I mean, you guys are on the beach.
Yeah. Well, we have a little yard, and we want to create. So my ideation of it was like create like a tropical hut, and so we have a bunch of coconut trees, like palm trees. That it's the season now. They're a lot of the coconuts are blooming on them, so the leaves are falling. Some of the old leaves are falling off, and I'm like, let's create like thatch siding for the fort. So it's basically just a platform with a couple rails, and then we're going to thatch the siding with coconut palms so that they've got like a tropical little pirate ship platform, Hopefully it'll be done by the time you guys come out here.
That'd be great. Anissa would love that kind of stuff, and I think she's going to fit in great with the crowd that you guys have out there. So we've been, kind of just poking around on flights. And there was this insane deal on Southwest. We ended up not losing it because I didn't know if, Southwest, if you have an itinerary and you reserve it, that doesn't reserve the price. I don't know what it does.
Wait, what's the point then?
Exactly. If you build an itinerary on Southwest and you say reserve this itinerary, and if you don't pay, they reserve the right to change the price.
Yeah. So
they did. And it went from their unbelievable price to a price that was nearly twice as much. So, which is whatever. I mean, we're planning on going, so whatever. It's not like it's expensive now either, because flights are just hilariously cheap.
Totally.
And we know that we're going to take our precautions on our travel, and it's just us, and we're going to be with just y'all. So I think that we're in good, we're in safe territory with all of that. And we're not intending to like be out and about and do any of that stuff. We're just going to be with you guys, and everybody's negative over here. So we go through all of that. And so I think that we're that it's kind of a good plan for us to kind of get out and get together. So, and I think that hopefully people will start being able to do that a little bit more.
I mean, think about what you just said. Do you realize how fucking crazy that sounds? That like we have to.
Which part?
It used to be like we're gonna.
The amount of stuff you got to do.
Yeah, well, like we're coming to New York or we're coming to SF these days, and let's connect and like hang out. Now it has to be this like consciously designed, minimal contact. Which is, I actually think it's a great thing from our perspective to be able to spend that type of quality time with our families together, right? Because we've only before in the past, we've like connected for a day or like a few days when we were in San Francisco or something like that, right? Or when you guys were in New York. we're now planning like a week of just staying together, and which is an incredible thing from the lifestyle perspective, but just the extra precautions of like, we got to test, you got to do the test before, you got to test the kid. Like, do you have to test the baby?
No.
Okay.
But there's been no real cases on babies, and I'm not even sure where the data is on whether or not they can transmit even. But that I guess that's something that's worth thinking about. But the baby has literally not interacted with anyone but us. You know what I mean? Like, for basically the baby's entire life.
Yeah.
So it's kind of weird that we had a baby just right before this lockdown, and that for the vast majority of his life he has not spent time with anybody but us, which is great for us. But I'm also like a subscriber to exposure resistance. Like how sick you get later just based on how exposed you are or really early in life. So hopefully this is not something that where he becomes a little bit more delicate later on, because he's done nothing but stay inside the house for damn near a year. So I guess we'll see how that unfolds, but it's not like we have a choice. But yeah, to your point about how much has to be done now just to be able to get out of the house, I think that that's going to be a bigger issue than people think today about like what the long-term impact of human relationships are going to be. And because I think that people don't even know what the impact is with work relationships, with if they're going to have to go back to the office and what that looks like. And some companies are saying, hey, you don't have to go back for all of 2021. Some companies are saying you don't have to go back ever.
Yeah.
Some companies are not having an opinion here. Those are the ones that fully expect their employees to go back to work, go back to the office. And when you do that, there'll have to be some like restarting of the standard, relationship side of human life. And because I have no idea how any of that stuff is functioning today, like dating, going out to dinner, all of that stuff. I mean, some of it is happening in small pockets, but not nearly to the extent and to the scale that it was, this time last year. So there'll be some effort that's made there. And I think that it's the true lack of people having the opportunity to interact with one another at work and outside of work, that there'll be, I think that there'll be some like really apprehensive tiptoeing around, how do we do this again?
Yeah.
So, and how do we do it again? How do we make sure that we're safe when we're back together? How do we make sure that we're doing all of that? And I think that the real risk there, that it could be a frustrating experience, because I think that there'll be some of this trying to get started and then hold on, reel it back. There's been a couple of cases that's happening all over.
Dude, it's happening. It happened here. We're coming out of our second shutdown here. The kids have already gone to school, had it shut down, and now they're back in school.
Yeah, exactly. And how do you deal with that? I think from a mental standpoint, this back and forth, how do your relationships survive stuff like that? I think it'll make some relationships stronger, but it'll make a lot of relationships a hell of a lot worse. And as people get more and more stressed out, those things become obvious when you're under stress, or you become angry. However you manifest that stress. So I think that there's a new industry that's behind just managing relationships with one another over the course of the next few years. It's going to change like the way that employees hire or employers hire. It's going to change how people interview, how people travel, obviously. It's going to change how people are dating. There's no doubt about that. So all of those things are changing. I think there'll be some emergence of some new industry. And there's some signs that already show that there's like a new industry underway that's going to manage risk against human interaction. And so there's a few companies that started in this area, and now everybody's on board, like Google and Salesforce, and a lot of these companies are getting started that have some geolocation aspect that's usually involved with your phone or a secondary hardware device that you carry that interacts with other people, and then examines the risk that you're under and that they're under, to contract, in this particular case, something like COVID-19, and says that, okay, you are within 6 foot of this other person, or you are in proximity with this other person, and that other person a week later has tested positive, and you get notified, hey, somebody has tested positive that you've been in contact with within 6 feet over the past few days, and you need to go get tested yourself. That technology now, I think, will be a commonplace thing, and I think it raises a couple of really important questions, like, just like, this is like the kind of like the Patriot Act of personal healthcare information. People will volunteer a lot of personal healthcare information into this kind of software, and in exchange, the software will provide to them the amount of risk that they're under when they're out in social situations. Because frankly, I would love to know that if I was out in a social situation with anybody, if they have tested positive a few days before or after I met up with them.
Sure.
Right. I would love to have that information.
Yeah.
I think it's imminent that we get something like that everybody is walking around with some kind of app that is gonna give them that kind of info.
You just gave me reason number fucking 9,000 to switch to a burner phone. I get it.
Yeah.
I totally get it. Like, especially if you live in a city. And I'm not even arguing the need for it. I'm just seeing this is another very slippery slope, right? It has to be designed. Totally. And I think what there seems to be a disconnect in the consciousness that was used to design Google and Facebook and Twitter and all of these things, where they gained so much scale, much bigger than anyone ever anticipated, or could have reasonably anticipated. I think everyone wanted them to be that big, right? That was involved, but they didn't even understand what that meant. And now we know what it means, right? We've got Amazon, we've got all these big companies. We know what it means to have that type of scale. And the design of this has to be from that place of consciousness where it's like a true opt-in, opt-out at a scalable level, where like the exact person, you won't know who it was, but you'll know that you were in contact with that person. And, otherwise, dude, I could see that fucking pitting like a Lord of the Flies scenario,
Yeah. I mean, like, I'll tell you how slippery a slope this is. It could be very reasonable to think that one step away from this, one derivation or one cycle away from this, which, I mean, HIV really propagated and became popular in the 80s here in the United States. But if, let's say, this was now in the HIV era, which is that's all it would really take today, this kind of social awareness around your responsibility to take care of your fellow citizens in their rate of infection, and you to do your part in that, it is very likely, it's very reasonable to think that that every time that you get tested for an STD, that there is an app that informs everybody that you have recently fucked your test results. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
That's an entirely reasonable step for this to take, that says, okay, I got tested for an STD and here's the result. And that this app is going to take that result and then tell the last 3 people that I fucked that, hey, I tested positive for gonorrhea or whatever, And all it takes, if it was something like HIV, that's when you start thinking about, okay, well, it's a matter of life and death. So now you have a responsibility, not just that, an obligation, that if you test positive for it, that you have to call just about everybody you've ever been with. Even today, it's kind of socially responsible to do that, to call everybody that you've ever been with and say that, hey, I've got a positive thing and you need to go and get tested yourself. That's a reasonable thing to do today if you get positively tested. It's very easy to think that that this new era of biotracking for your viral risk will be now a new that will be a mandate that could span a number of other infectious disease areas, a number of other overall holistic health issues in general, of which we are either willfully or are legally bound to disclose certain private healthcare situations because of the social pressure that we'll receive to accommodate everybody else's risk that has had close contact with us. I'm not sure that if this is a good or bad thing. What I can tell you is that that there's a real possibility that your protection of a positive diagnosis for anything that puts others at risk may not be a decision that you solely carry or that you get to make.
Sure.
And this is kind of one of those. It's not a legal precedent yet, but it sure as hell is a social one.
For sure.
And in some cases, the social precedent has a much higher prosecution cost than a legal one. Because because socially you can get crucified for even relatively benign things, but now I think that there's so much social pressure to be able to do that, and ultimately what we're asking people to do is to volunteer relatively sensitive information about themselves that potentially puts other people at risk. I'm not sure this is unreasonable, but I think that it's a gray area of which we will discover over the next couple of years what humanity's real appetite is to be able to do something like this, and that will be at the core of what will empower people to willfully engage in relationships again, that are intimate or otherwise, and that this we're in a long road ahead about how people kind of do this stuff, because I think that people will say, we'll jump right back into the boat, and then it'll all get reeled back in, and then that might happen 2 or 3 times before people say, okay, what we need, if we're going to stop this sort of up and down wavelength of infection rate, is that we need some tools to help us manage, our own risk and our and the factors of which we're putting others at risk around us. So so now this looks like it's going to be a multi-billion-dollar industry that is going to be a technology-enabled category for people to determine their risk and the risk that they're introducing.
Yeah, I think the key to everything lies in the balance of it, in creating that point that is, it has the most amount of positive externalities, the least amount of negative externalities as a society. And I'm just using an example as someone who's spent a lot of time on planes. Yeah, I never wanted to be the guy who was like hacking my fucking lungs out and got on the plane. I would cancel my trip out of respect for humanity, to not go hack up a bunch of stuff on a 6-hour plane ride, and potentially get other people sick, and also to rest for myself. Unfortunately, what we've seen in this pandemic in America is that by and large, people don't give a fuck. And they're just doing whatever they want. And right. I think that's where the problem, if that technology brings some sort of balance to that, I think that's a good thing, where people will say, hey, I don't need to get, this meeting is not that important. I can virtually, be present in that meeting, and I will be present. I'll put down my phone and I will be present in that meeting for 45 minutes, right? Even though it's a long time for a lot of people these days. That's the type of positive externality. But I think the system we're at a point where it could tip the scale either way, right? The civilization is so fucking volatile right now. It's on the edge, right? And it could tip it in either direction. And I just think that anything from a technology perspective should be built at that level of consciousness. And then people can decide, I want to live in San Francisco, I want to be a part of this, or I want to live in fucking Montana, right? And not have to deal with this. There's a lot of use cases that make a lot of sense. I'll give you a perfect example. There's a large category of people
who are kind of on the on the more susceptible scale for social anxiety, that have either depressive or depressive-like tendencies, that are also at risk for things like addiction and being manic and some more complex disorders like that. There's a group of people that are in that category that have been immobilized by COVID, not because they are at any particular risk or that their normal day-to-day activities puts them at risk, but that the sheer fear of them being able to contract the virus. These are people that are typically in those risk categories or have some secondary conditions, that are typically living alone, or they have small social networks as it is, and they have those types of propensities or those pre-existing mental health conditions that when now presented with the risk that you could contract COVID and die from it at some non-negligible rate, being in the 60 plus category or whatever, that has completely isolated them, and that something like a piece of software that gives some reassurance that says, okay, we're going to make sure that you're going to get some kind of warning or some kind of alarm that will give you some guidance on how much risk you are under. Whether it's like a 6-foot proximity alarm or whether it's anything like that. It doesn't have to be that much because their risk wasn't high to contract to begin with, but it's enough for them to overcome the anxiety of that is at the root of their self-isolation. And that points to the software having a secondary impact, not just for impacting the rate of the transmission of the virus itself, but also for the idea of promoting the sense of togetherness, which is going to be really a mental health challenge. So I think that there's a lot of things like that. That's just one example. There's a lot of things like that because we haven't even tackled how it might impact people that are kids or people that have already received it, already gotten already diagnosed positive, but are now over it. That those people are still considered a little bit of an outsider. People are still apprehensive, and
why do you think that is?
I think,
why do you think that is from like a human perspective?
I think that there's some self-preservation that kicks in. I'll give you a perfect example. That there's somebody that I know that was that was positive, had extreme symptoms, and got over it, quarantined himself, got over it, and a couple of weeks later tested negative. But what I can tell you is that people weren't breaking down his door to go and meet up with him, right? Even though he's testing negative now, there's still so many unknowns that I think that your self-preservation kicks in and said, okay, well, is the possibility that it's a false negative? Is there a possibility that he can still transmit despite this test being negative? Is there still a possibility? Blah blah. I mean, there's a bunch of unknowns that are still there for people, and so there is still apprehension that people have, and maybe rightfully so, until those answers are really crystal clear. So I think that's kind of that's another issue that. Hey, maybe if I get it, I know that I'm at risk and I should quarantine myself. But then what if I'm over it? I'm still paying some penalty for, at least a social penalty for God knows how long, about how to get back to normal life. And I think that this is another thing that if you're susceptible to something like, like a little bit higher on the anxiety spectrum, or you have you have a tendency to have situational depression because of situations like this, then then that individual is going to be at some risk, and I think that there's an entire risk category that is completely unexplored today because the media is just eating up this idea of how many people have died, and those death rates and infection rates are the only metrics that really matter. Nobody's really looking at the long-term impact of people who have contracted it and lived, and what really the long-term biological studies and mental health studies are of those individuals. So I think that science will unfold over the next few years, and there's some things that suggest that the virus could have a much longer impact, particularly in people that are younger, that have underdeveloped brain tissue or muscle tissue, like kids that are in their teens, for example, where the virus might reside in their body for a number of years and affect the development of those kind of things. That it's a multi-system type of virus, not just a cardiopulmonary impact. None of that shit people know yet.
Yeah, but
so
we're not going to.
I think that
right? Like, there's no way. The only thing that will provide answers to that is the passage of time.
Yeah.
Yeah,
time is going to be a big part of that. But I think that we have some opportunities today to kind of preemptively tackle some of these issues and say that, okay, we know that there's going to be some things that come out of this. Like, for example, we talked about Savage's growing up now without any real human interaction. Anissa was at a Montessori school from 10 weeks on, and now Savage has spent nearly the first year of his life with interacting with less than 15 or 20 total people that are just in his immediate family. And so that's kind of we know that you scale that out to other people who depend on human interaction or relationships, or even you're talking about people that are single, that are living on their own, or in some of these cases, people that are in these, we have the ability to go outside and shit like that. Like, what the hell are people doing in New York that are living in 50, 60, 70 story high rises that are just stuck in there? So I think that there's some long-term impacts that I think that we can brace ourselves for, and know that, hey, for guys like us that that have an intent to really contribute to the welfare of lives of others and the quality of life of others, how do we throw ourselves into this situation and offer some coaching or guidance, or who knows what else, to individuals that we know that are going to struggle on getting on the other side of this? So that's kind of the thing that I've been focusing on the most. And I think that stuff like what we're doing like this is a good start, with us putting the voice out there and letting people know that, hey, there are people that are thinking about that and thinking about those that are vulnerable in this situation. And that although a plan may not be clear, that we're definitely racking our brains and coming up with what the right resources and coaching tools and support is for people that are susceptible, for long-term mortality or morbidity that is after surviving the actual virus.
Yeah, I think part of the challenge on top of that is, and I noticed this a couple weeks ago we have a pretty small social circle here, and actually taking a step back, as I'm listening to some of the bigger voices that are out in the universe today that have a lot of following, as we've approached the election, there's been this like myopic focus on one thing, which is politics. And I think the disservice that that's doing, while it's important, and I think that those people believe that they're helping, and maybe they are, because they have so much distribution that they're getting out, something that the media is not getting out about politics. There's a bunch of other discussions like this that aren't even happening. And I agree with you. We're putting something out that's like, hey, let's focus on some things that we can actually control. The political system, it's fucked. It's completely fucked, right? And I'm definitely writing in who I'm voting for. And I'm okay with that. Right. And I think it's okay for people to be okay with that, and also not make politics the same way you shouldn't just make money the center of your life. These things at the federal level, they have very little impact on you on a day-to-day basis of your existence. If you have a drive and a true will to serve the American people, you should go into politics. Right. And if you go into politics from that place, but I think what you're talking about is like, people need to move on. Something November 4th is going to happen, right? And there's still going to be these other things that you can do in society, you can choose to do, which is focus on how we can make cities safer, how we can make social circles safer, how we can make our families safer, and how we can help people. And I think that is just getting lost in the messaging that's coming. There's a unichannel coming into people's fucking brains, which is why, I stopped watching the news a long time ago. And I'm thankful that I built that habit before COVID, because I'll get little clips or something. Our neighbor will mention something and I want to look it up. And I look at it and I'm like, dude, this is a fucking cartoon. This is like watching a cartoon, right?
Yeah.
And I'm just not interested.
How much of it have you been keeping up with? Like
barely any.
I know that there was another debate. I didn't watch that one either.
Yeah, me neither. I was more interested in Kanye West's interview with Rogan, right?
Yeah, I saw only a couple of clips of it. How did it go? Because it was, that shit too was all over the news. But it's 3 hours and I couldn't carve that kind of time out, but I caught a couple of clips here and there. What was the gist of it? Because I am kind of interested in what that guy has to say.
So what was interesting from my perspective was that I saw a few people post on it that were like referencing like gibberish. And I was like, oh man, this must be like a train wreck or something on camera. So it got me really curious to listen to it. And I sat down and watched it and I'm like, Kanye West is easily the most conscious person running for president by far. Like it's like he's having a conversation with Rogan like you and I would have about like humanity and we need to help people. He has his twist on it is that, he has a strong affinity to the Christian religion because that's what he connects with. And that's okay. But he was talking about education and like the fundamental need for children to understand physics. And we're not teaching them these things. We're giving them little glimpses and then people feel good that they're educated. Then you put them in the system to just make money. But money's not like a real thing, Yeah. And that was his conversation, was like the need to be able to have communities that are sustainable in their own right. And kind of like the message I took away from it was like, make your world smaller. He talked a little bit about some of the corruption in the music industry and around the contracts and the structuring of it. And his solution is that he wants to be the leader of the free world, right? Because he wants to do it from a place of consciousness with a connection to his view of God, right? Yeah. And I was like, man, he's just being human. And he talked about some of the mental health stuff and like the medication that was pushed on him and stuff like this. And like, look, whatever you believe, I've never really watched him. I've never watched him interview anything. I listen to his music sometimes, right? I think he's an incredible artist. I think he's one of the most creative artists of our time. But I don't really follow him in any other capacity. And I heard him speak and I was like, dude, that could have easily been you or I on the other side of that microphone. Yeah. Right. It could have been many people that we know that have done the work on themselves. And what that indicated to me was that like, that's what our world needs. I'm not saying vote for Kanye West, right? I'm saying our world needs someone who's going to look at it from the perspective of everybody's human. This country is filled with a bunch of diverse humans. We have to move forward from that perspective. It doesn't matter what happened in the past. That is gone. We have the ability to create right now. And I think that's kind of what I took away from it. Maybe that's me hearing it through my own filters and how I view the universe. But I don't consume it. I would say if I consume 10 minutes to 30 minutes of traditional media a week, that's like on the high end, right? Yeah. Like I didn't even know a hurricane was coming here until my neighbors told me. And I was like, oh, I should go get some stuff. You know what I mean?
Right. Yeah. I mean, I've heard a few things that he said in a couple of clips of his Joe Rogan podcast. Some of the things I've heard are exactly what you said, very aware and lucid, perspectives that he's got on a number of things. And then some of the times he talks is just like a convoluted, rambling mess. And you know, I think he's somewhere in between those two things. But you know, obviously, I'm not sure he's the right. He's a good player for what he's trying to do in the present. But it brings up something interesting about Kanye West even running for presidency, which is, I think he's doing a couple of good things here with just that move, which is, you want to be able to present that the office of presidency is open. You know, if you think you can do a better job, then go try to do it. You know, and shoot for the sky. Like, if you think that you can do a better job than any of these motherfuckers that are out there trying to do that shit, then go try to do it. And you might as well shoot for positions like that are high rather than selling yourself short. And Kanye, I think, embodies that. And a big part of that is that he has a stratospheric sense of self-belief, self-assurance.
For sure.
And it seems like a lot of that is rooted in his faith or spirituality, and his just pure confidence that in that faith that he can tackle these kinds of challenges because he just believes that he can. There's something that's important about, people maintaining that belief in themselves, because life is sort of engineered into repeating to you your own inadequacies and why you shouldn't, or incapable, or too dumb, or too ugly to do any of that stuff that you really want. So, and I think that he's done I think he's done a great job of getting over that for himself at the very least. But then when it comes to like practical application of certain things, which an office like the presidency is going to require, he is in the clouds, and I think that's where it gets tough to put like somebody who is who thinks, like in this artistic free expression of just ideas that come at him in many different directions, which he even says that that's how his mind does work, and that though when he tries to express those things, that those are the basis of his songs. And I get that is there's something really creatively special about that. But then, like a lot of policy and a lot of the way that the government works is just like numbers, and it's messy, and it's process, and it's details, and it's 1,600 page bills and shit like that nobody would in their right mind would ever read.
Right. But
so
that's the thing, nobody's reading them. They're just stacking them together in these fucking Frankenstein pieces. It's by the way, this is the same thing that happens with legal documents in highly structured transactions, right? There's there's a group of lawyers who use a template, who put it together, and then they adjust it based on another person's input, and then it's negotiated from there and this other party, and then you put it in a drawer, right? Which is what legislation is at its core. And like, I don't disagree with what you're saying, that like, look, is that person, I don't even like to use the word fit for the office, because I think it's okay that role in this country changes. I think it's okay to not have a technocrat or a bureaucrat or an autocrat in that position. I think it's okay to say we need to take the intent of being free and innovate on it from where we are today. Because right now we have this huge fucking machine. And I can tell you one thing right now, the Department of Education is not going to fix itself. No matter who you put in charge of it, it's not going to fix itself. That's going to come from either the people on a local level, or it's going to come from the top and someone who has a vision for what that could look like. And it's the same thing for the IRS, for this. Like, you can apply that to anything. I pick education because I think that's what's important for the future of humanity. And you have to, I think, to not look at things as like, well, I'm only going to do what's in the best interest of America. maybe there's some things in the best interest of America that involve all humanity. Maybe.
Yeah. And you know, remember when we were at when we were at that business mastery program and Ray Dalio was on the phone and then everybody was like, Ray Dalio for president. And he was like, I don't want that job. You know what I mean? I'm almost inclined to say that, you know, somebody who would really be a good president today is somebody who doesn't want to do it. You know, because I think once you get into wanting to do it, you start immediately asking, okay, well, why the hell do you want to do it? Like, who would want that job? And it's hard to think anybody who would want that job, because there's only one of a couple of reasons. Either your personal incentive is so high that you want to do it, or that you have a real you're really committed on the idea that what you can do will make some positive impact, you know, in the world around you. Or I don't really know. I don't really know what the motivators are for somebody that says, hey, you know what, that's a job that I want. Because anybody who's sensible doesn't want that job. So I mean, you take like guys who are really good and qualified and strong and intelligent people that run massive companies and large businesses that are lucid and logical, that can approach this. They're like, I don't want to do that shit at all. They don't want to touch politics. So, but I feel like it's those people that should be doing it, you know? And I'm just using Dalio as an example, but like,
you can write him in.
I feel like now
right?
What's
you
that?
can write him in. That's your right as an American.
Exactly.
You can write him in.
I bet he wouldn't get a trivial number of people that want him to do that job. But I mean, that's kind of the thing, is like, everybody who's trying to get the job, you know, from what I have heard, the immediate question is that, man, why do you want to do that? You know, like, would you ever get to the point where you think you would run for office?
Dude, there's always been something in me that has wanted to be the president. Always. Since I was a little kid.
Yeah.
I don't know what that is. Yeah. I'm still, and by the way, I have very little political aspirations or very little tolerance for the bullshit. Like I probably wouldn't last a day in its current form, because I would be like, fuck this. I'm out. You know, but I do think, from a place of true service, right? Like, this is what I've been thinking about lately. What if there was a president that went in and just ended wars? Just ended them. Not in an irresponsible way. It has to be structured, but, and I'm pro-military. Right? I have a deep amount of respect for anyone who serves the country to protect the American way of life. And I think this is what I end up battling with, is like, why can't we just end some of this stuff that's like, it's fucking Cold War era 1960s shit, right? We're in a different place. Like, all this was formed around this like ego, this collective ego. And not all trade agreements are bad. A lot of them aren't great, you know? And so I think if you can go in with that sense of service, of like truly serving the American people, and also on top of that, be able to communicate effectively without cutting people down, I think it's critical, man.
Yeah, I think you're talking about some of the real fundamental parts of what it means to be human. And this is talked about a lot by the philosopher Martin Heidegger, in some of which in Heidegger's Poker and a number of his other works about even the nature to be human is to exercise your will onto others through force. So, and that in some cases it is that is a demonstration of the inadequacy of language to express one's own thoughts and feelings. So it gets a lot more philosophical, and I think right to the root of what it means to even be human. If we'll ever get to the point of what you're describing as ending war as even being realistic, because the number one way that humans have always thought to resolve dispute is to the use and exercise of force, and to get what you want is through violence. And it is such a fundamental part of our not just of our species, but about our neurological construction. The way that we're designed and architected neurologically is almost got that very rooted in our hedonic system. And I'm not sure that it will be. I think it might be different to where the definition of war changes. You know, I think we used to try to get what we want through force, and that force turned out to be what we traditionally consider as war. I think that will change, because the leverage of what you will be able to get will be a lot more powerful than than trying to kill humans or trying to kill other people. I think you can get a lot more leverage to get what you want doing other things. So I think the format of war will look very different, but I think it will still, at the root of it, being, one tribe that is driving what it wants and its agenda to get what it wants through force. And I think it's an interesting philosophical argument. People have spent their entire lives studying this, and I'm almost really at the limit of what I know about it already. But but I think it's a fascinating topic to kind of to think about, because knowing that that's the case, I think it's setting the expectation really high to say that, hey, is there a way to put an end to human conflict? I think that that's just unrealistic in my mind today, unless we evolve as a species. So, which, maybe maybe even that's possible. But yeah, I think that the expectation for something like that is really high. I think the best that we can hope for is that that from a political standpoint, how these two worlds blend, is that there is some redirection of resource from the war agenda as we traditionally know it, to try to to try to where those resources are pointed more towards the improvement of quality of life. I think that's not going to eradicate what we think is what is traditionally some kind of war effort, or one group exercising their will against another group by the use of force. I think all of that shit will still exist, but I think what is much more reasonable is that, hey, we got a lot of funds and resources pointed at building rockets, for example, and that is a really inefficient way for us to get what we want. And instead, we should redirect those funds, use them where they're better suited, and wage war in a different way. And I think that's a lot more likely, to be honest, because I don't think the war thing is gonna go anywhere. But I think the fact that we might be, the format might change, just like it was. It was spears and swords to cannons and muskets to now intercontinental ballistic missiles. And it will change again to where I think it will be some other form of leverage that is less weaponry based, but it's still back to the same principle. And it will divert a lot of resources that hopefully we can reapply and make the actual people's quality of life better. And so I think that there is some evolution of war that will happen over the next few hundred years. But I think us as a species, we're a long way away from, and that's just my opinion. I don't have any science around it, but I think we're a long way away from saying that we're not going to try to get what we want from others by forcing them to do it.
That's an interesting perspective. It's I think in a lot of ways, I agree with you. And in one fundamental way, I think if people connect with themselves and what it is to be human, I think that threshold for war goes way up, right? And my personal philosophy in terms of how I live is live in peace, always be prepared for war. Train, it doesn't mean don't train. It doesn't mean don't have a military presence, right? That's not what I'm saying. And I think you did a great job of like flushing that out. That isn't beyond a last resort, right? Because at the end of the day, if you sit down with what's the difference between you and me and some person from Russia and some person from China and some person, like we all have one thing in common, right? And and that's a big thing. Yeah. And I think when we can move
this reminds me of it's interesting we're having this conversation because just yesterday, the Netflix queue brought up the 1985 movie War Games starring Matthew Broderick on my Netflix to watch queue. And it's a movie that I loved ever since I was a kid. And one of the things that prompted me to really look into computers and networking back then. But it is surprisingly accurate also on how basic computer technology and networking worked back then, and it holds up. I think that movie holds up pretty good. I think I might watch it with the family in light of this conversation, because it is exactly about that, the stalemate about in the human inefficiency of waging war against one another. And if you haven't checked out that movie, you should. I think it was Matthew Broderick's breakout role. Okay, it's called War Games.
I will check it out. I'm definitely interested.
And incidentally, it also takes place in the Pacific Northwest, completely randomly.
Shout out to the PNW.
So,
except for Portland.
On that note,
get your shit together, Portland. I don't even know what's happening up there now. Right. But
dude, I've heard there's still protests on the street.
Dude, you know what I would recommend checking out? This is one thing that I think it's, what's it called? I'm going to post it in the episode notes because it's like, all gas, no brakes. It's like a 22 or 23-year-old kid. He's driving around the country right now, just kind of documenting what's happening in different places. And he spent some time in Portland. Dude, all gas, no brakes. The kid he's a comedic and kind of social genius in how he's doing things. It's pretty incredible. But I'll
check it out.
Yeah, check that out. I will check out War Games, and we'll do this again next week, man.
Sounds good, brother. Talk to you soon.
Thank you for the time, bro. I love you.
Of course, as always. Love you, my man. See you soon.
Bye.